Welcome to another edition of Chief Sales Executive Television. I'm Rick Longnecker, your host. Today our topic is, why do salespeople struggle with sales call execution? Let's begin by defining metrics that would help us understand if we're struggling with sales call execution or not. As you can see on the screen, there are many metrics we can look at. If we're not doing well in one or more of these metrics, it's a safe bet that we're struggling with sales call execution. Over the past 20 years, we found a common set of reasons that salespeople struggle with sales call execution across the employee life cycle, from onboarding through getting salespeople to cross-sell, through communicating updates of product and service and pricing changes to salespeople, to training salespeople to sell new offerings that we're releasing, enabling salespeople to cross-sell post-merger while all of the merger integration activities are underway. And last but not least, focusing salespeople on past buyer winbacks. Now let's take a look at what we found. First, we found that salespeople that are struggling with sales call execution are typically selling products and services that are not understood or valued by buyers in the marketplace through their purchasing. We find complications in features, functions, applications of products and services, troubles with contract durations or discounting procedures and policies. First and foremost, to help salespeople execute sales calls effectively, we have to have products and services that are must-haves, that are understood and valued by the buyers. The second area that we see salespeople struggling with is executing sales calls inconsistently from sales call to call and salesperson to person. We find that one of the most common reasons why salespeople struggle is they use different sequences of questions, answers, explanations, and documents when they're interacting with buyers. They use different sequences call to call, and each salesperson uses different sequences. We find them skipping stages of the call. More often than not, salespeople open up with rapport building, do a teeny bit of buyer lead qualification, and they skip to their demo, their sales pitch, and they make a tremendous amount of assumptions as they skip through these sales call stages. We also find that they're not identifying and prioritizing all of the buyer's problems. Therefore, they're not cross-selling effectively. We also find they're not making buyers aware of all the products and services because they don't know how to get all that information on the table quickly. And last but not least, we find that salespeople struggling with sales call execution forget to present key functions, features, and benefits from call to call to call. Number three, we find that sales folks are wasting the buyer's time while trying to prove that they themselves and that their company is worthy of doing business with. In simple terms, we all know buyers don't care who our clients are. They don't care about your offices, factories, logistics, software, your capabilities, your case studies, your app. They don't care about that stuff. Those are vetting type questions that buyers have when they don't understand why they're in sales calls. Number three, we see that salespeople that struggle with sales call execution are making volumes of assumptions about the buyer without validating those assumptions throughout every stage of the sales calls. Salespeople that are struggling make assumptions about what questions to ask buyers. They make assumptions about what answers to give. They make assumptions about what documents to share with the buyer. And they make assumptions about the buyer's situation, their challenges. They assume the buyer knows the seller's solutions in the product category. And they make assumptions about the buyer's ability to accurately assess competing solutions. Assumptions kill sales calls. Number four, we find that salespeople that are struggling to present, and they actually are presenting, confusing information and messages to the buyer. They're asking random sequences of questions completely out of context to the buyer. They're over and under explaining features, functions, and facts about their company, their offerings, and their value proposition. They're confusing the buyer by offering answers and explanations to questions the buyer's not asked. They're using jargon, buzzwords, and persuasive language, trying to persuade buyers to their way of thinking and to make a purchase. They're also providing incomplete answers and statements and documents, sometimes misleading. And last but not least, they're sharing information that's just plain and simply irrelevant to the buyer. The fifth area we see salespeople struggling with is getting sidetracked during sales calls. They get sidetracked when they're inconsistent with rank ordering the buyer's priorities consistently and constantly at every stage of the sales call. They're not stopping to validate that the buyer understands questions that they're asking. They're not evaluating and helping the buyer evaluate the impact or the relevance of questions and answers that they're sharing with the buyer. They're just pushing information at the buyer, not stopping to evaluate the impact that information has on solving the buyer's problem. And last but not least, they're not testing for agreement before moving on to the next discussion point during sales calls. All of these add up to sidetracking the sales call. The sixth area is interrupting or prematurely ending sales calls. We find that many companies we find most companies place their salespeople in a position where they have to contact technical experts, interrupt, end sales calls to gather information to answer buyer questions. While they're doing that, ending the call or pausing, the time clock is ticking. The length of time to close the sale is increasing. And all of that time is self-imposed by the company because we're not arming salespeople with the information they need. And we're forcing them to end calls or reach out through instant messaging or phone calls, or actually bringing technical experts into sales calls, which causes a problem with interrupting and prematurely ending the call. Number 7, we see sales folks that are struggling not being able to overcome the barriers, the natural barriers that exist between the buyer and the seller during sales calls. It goes without saying that buyers and sellers come into a sales call or a selling environment with unique perspectives, different goals, volumes of complex information and documents to share with each other, time pressure to make decisions, not waste time and to close deals, and they just plain and simply have opposing approaches to managing conversations. These are natural barriers that salespeople who struggle with sales call execution struggle to overcome these barriers. Number 8, salespeople have limited or no access to sales information live time during sales calls. PowerPoints, pricing models, pricing calculators, proposal generating capabilities, notes, scripts, dialogues, product information, technical detail, support documents. Once again, leading to the salesperson not being able to answer buyer questions, and at times inaccurately answering questions or not answering those questions. It causes a problem for the salesperson to execute sales calls. Number 9, we find that salespeople are wasting time and energy before and after sales calls, preparing and updating sales presentations, reviewing, translating, memorizing updates of sales information, product information, pricing information. We find that salespeople are wasting time rehearsing sales pitches rather than focusing on how to help buyers problem solve and engage the problem solving process with buyers. We find that they're wasting time and energy tracking sales pipeline activities and history notes and things that can be automated rather than forcing salespeople to waste time outside of the sales call tracking information. Number 10, the last piece is complicating factors that we found over the last 20 years. We find that salespeople are distracted with an endless blizzard of changes. When companies struggle with revenue growth or with sales call execution, sales leadership and company leadership tends to embark upon process improvement efforts, most of the time not doing one at a time. We find that most companies whose salespeople struggle with sales call execution, you can directly look at them and there's a direct correlation to the volume and the number of process improvement initiatives that are underway with sales technology, process and procedure changes, hiring and firing of salespeople, training of salespeople, which distracts them and takes them out of the selling environment, and sales structural changes, territory design, and changes of job responsibilities. All of these things compile to create an environment where salespeople struggle to execute sales calls. Here's a great quote from the book, The Checklist Manifesto, How to Get Things Right. The modern world has given us stupendous know-how, yet available failures continue to plague us, and the reason is simple. The volume and complexity of knowledge today has exceeded our ability as individuals to properly deliver the knowledge to people consistently, correctly, and safely. We train longer, specialize more, and use ever-advancing technologies, and we still fail in executing sales calls. So what's our conclusion? What we found over the past 20 years is that the exchange of information between the buyer and the seller during sales calls is not being managed with precision, effectively, efficiently, and predictably. The buyer is working to match their wants and needs to the seller's solutions, and the seller is working to qualify the buyer, demonstrate offerings, propose solutions, and close a sales deal. So how do we solve this problem? Well, what we found at Chief Sales Executive Advisors is we shift salespeople from using traditional sales call tools to using a conversation facilitation approach and set of tools. So what is this tool called? It's called the NaviGuide. The NaviGuide anticipates, organizes, and maps the most precise sequence of questions, answer statements, and documents that are required to complete a sales call. The NaviGuide also uses one document, not multiple, but one document to create a visual frame of reference to get and keep the buyer and the seller on the same page at all times during sales calls. Number 3, the NaviGuide visually presents all information and documents using simple, non-persuasive language, images, and graphics, which keeps salespeople from having to memorize volumes and volumes of hierarchically ordered information. Number 4, the NaviGuide uses one click to instantly access information and documents at the exact moment they're needed during the sales call. And last but not least, the NaviGuide uses daily updates to guarantee that salespeople use the most up-to-date information without needing to stop, memorize, review, and rehearse that information. In short, the NaviGuide is one tool that solves 4 challenges. To learn more about how the NaviGuide can help your salespeople execute sales calls with precision from call to call and from salesperson to salesperson, simply go to chiefsalesexecutive.com.